no, it's not always open. I have to be doing a lot of honest reflection and work on my end to keep it open. But when it's open, it's like the best therapy and the most beautiful experience for myself when those things come through.
What if story is the answer to our crises of meaning and belonging, to our impulse to heal our lives and help others, to our desire and drive to leave this world better than we found it? Now, we love good stories. In fact, we're kind of obsessed, not just with the stories themselves, but with the stories behind the stories. Their oddly perfect timing, the healing process they provoke in their authors, and their capacity to catalyze individual and collective change. And we love exploring these with writers, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, healers, parents, and others. Tune in to hear these stories behind the stories and entertain with us the real possibility that whether you are a teller or a consumer, story is always offering or leading us to an answer. When my little sister was nudged to write her first book, she took the inspiration and ran with it, straight into bestseller status before she was even 21 years old. She had no idea that that book she had just written would be the map and the medicine she needed to face the tragedy that awaited her just 2 months after the launch of this book and her new business. Tune in to find out how Alyssa reached bestseller status without formulas, how she wrestled with the core message of her first book, Chosen, before and after it launched, how she alchemized 2 excruciating tragedies through the writing of her upcoming novel, and how she received the biggest gift anyone could give her from a mentor who said, "No, you don't have my permission to write about me, my work, or our experience." Trust me when I say you're probably going to want a giant cup of something yummy to sip on today. Welcome to Sips of Story and Sanity, where we talk about the stories behind the stories with authors, speakers, thought leaders, healers, parents, and more. My team, son Aaron, sister Alyssa, and clients turned friends turned team members, Teddy and Lori, are here to help me make sure that we get the most delicious experience possible. And today, we have one of our team members being interviewed, which is really exciting. Alyssa Noel Cuello, my little sister, is a #1 best-selling author, internationally published model, Latin dancer, entrepreneur, and philanthropist who works all over the globe. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Sociocultural Anthropology from the University of California, San Diego. She creates, coaches, and writes to inspire and mobilize individuals and communities to take action toward becoming the answers our world, our planet, and our species need, to create a future where every individual of every race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religious tradition, and socioeconomic status, and cultural custom and language is able to experience a vibrant and authentic life. So let's start out by asking, how old are you to have done all of this? Let's just establish that, because people are looking at your face or listening, and maybe they don't realize how young your face is. But how old are you?
That's funny that was a mouthful of a bio. Yes. I am 25. I'll be 26 next month.
Mm-hmm.
It's very strange.
So you've done
say,
all
actually.
of that by the time you're 20 and not even 26 yet.
Yes.
How did you do that?
That's a great question. Well, a lot of discipline and a lot of, I had the right sisters. A lot of it really, it was just a matter of all of the resources and people lining up and showing up in my life at exactly the right time that they needed to. And and saying yes along the way every time opportunities came up to explore those things, even when it was extremely uncomfortable.
It's been uncomfortable.
It's all been uncomfortable. I can't think of one moment where it was comfortable.
I always love, it reminds me, I had a guy who was trying to coach me once, and I say try because he was like, Amanda, it's really about getting outside of your comfort zone. And I was like, dude, I haven't seen the backside of my comfort zone for 6 years. Like, who is going to be my coach? Because it's not this guy.
Yeah, that's funny. I know in the last few conversations I've had with people who were younger, some youth, some people in their earlier teens and later teens, and the conversations kind of unfolded to them talking about their future, or I don't know about this and I don't know about that, and I got this opportunity, and I was just like, say yes, just say yes, just do it. And as I was saying that, I was like, oh my God, I'm that person now who's telling them to just say yes. Like, you poor thing. I know I'm pushing you to the edge of your cliff, but it's a huge part of the process and just getting experiences, across the board. So whether you know how to do what you're trying to do or not, you figure it out and you learn when you say yes. So that's my answer to that.
Well, I just wanted to like make that a thing, because people who are watching this are going to be, and I know it's a thing that happens to you pretty often, of like, yeah, and I've done this and this and this and this and this, and people are like trying to do math in their heads of like, how long does that take normal people?
Well, that's really funny because as I'm turning 26, I'm wondering when that's going to end. I'm like, at what age are people going to be like, oh, okay, that's not really a big deal anymore, because I've always kind of been on the younger spectrum of hanging out with adults or being in the communities of, people who are a little older. And so I'm wondering when the shock is going to fade. Is it at 26? Is it at 28?
I don't know. Because see, the thing
We'll
is, I
see.
don't anticipate your list is going to get any smaller or stop growing. So I kind of wonder if the math will just always turn into people going,
That's funny. Yeah, I'm still saying yes quite a bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, you've been my little sister for your entire life.
All
And
25 years.
yes. And so I know some things, but I'm not going to talk about all of them here. But one thing that I think it's important for people to know is like about your love of writing, because you have a book. It was a #1 bestseller, and you are a gifted writer working on a novel. But like, where did that love of writing start for you?
That's a great question. I think in my early years, through the first time I really remember my writing being recognized was by a 5th grade teacher who was like, hey, you have some skill here and you should, apply with the other students to write the valedictorian speech for the 5th grade graduation. And so I did, and I got it, and I gave the speech. And then it was really important teachers along the way who saw sort of the natural skills that were in there. It wasn't something I just like loved to do growing up. I never kept a journal. I could never do that. Every time I tried to, it didn't work. And I just walked around with empty journals because I liked the way they felt in my arms. And yeah, so, and then when I got into middle school, I had a really hard few years in middle school and high school, and writing sort of became a kind of like a coping mechanism. I wasn't super verbal, and I had a lot of emotions coursing through me, and it was almost like that the brokenness that I was feeling in those years kind of cracked open almost like a channel. And so I would hear words, and I didn't always know what they meant, and I just started writing them. And so I got really into poetry doing that. So that was poetry specifically has always been kind of like a coping mechanism. And then over the years, I've just sort of refined the writing skills in different areas, creative writing, poetic writing, and academic writing. So yeah, I've definitely discovered a love for it.
Yeah,
through all
it's
those different
definitely
avenues.
one of your superpowers. I think I've said this before, that there are people who learn how to write well, and then there are people who are just here to write. And it's a gift, and it's like medicine coming through their fingertips. And I think that word channel is probably a really good term to capture
Thank
that.
you.
And that is definitely true for your writing. Definitely.
Thank you. Yeah, that's probably the biggest compliment. I've heard you say that before, and every time it hits me so deeply because um, some people come into this world and from very young, they're like, I'm going to be an attorney and I'm going to be a marine biologist. And, they have these things that are set for them. And I never really felt like that with anything. But whenever the question came across, like, what do you feel like you're here meant to do? Like, what are you meant to do here in this world? And the only thing that would come up is write, and of course I've kind of morphed that into writing to make a difference in the lives around me, writing to have an influence on the world in some way, but yeah, some sort of writing. So I really, it means a lot when other people get that from my words too, because it's such a personal experience for me, especially poetry, because it's like a channel, so it's something I hold very to be very sacred to me. So often it doesn't quite feel like it's me writing when those words come through. And when I will sit there and I'll reread some of the things I've written or some of the poems, and it hits me so deeply. Like, this is so precious because I don't really associate it as my work. And I just hope that when I share it with other people, it resonates in a similar way too. So to get type of feedback is so rewarding.
Yeah. So one thing I'm curious about is, when I see people have these incredible gifts, and there's, a lot of talk in this space around writer's block. Like, is your channel always open? Is it always easy to access the words, or?
This is a fun one. So because I've gotten very real with myself. Yeah, I've gotten very real with myself about this recently. No, that channel is not always open. I have noticed it will close down for weeks at a time, months at a time, and at one point years at a time. And when I look back and honestly reflect, it was always during a time when I was like really going through something in my life that I didn't want to admit was happening. So at one point, for as an example, I got into a very abusive relationship and living situation, and for 2 years in my writing, I was not writing at all. And unfortunately, when I got out of that situation, it was like a dam broke, and I filled 2 entire journals with writing. And it was like, it was all right here, but because I didn't make space for it in my life in an honest way, with sort of, it's like in that type of channel feels like it's a gift for me. I see it as a gift to me. And when I don't hold in integrity and alignment with it, it shuts down. So no, it's not always open. I have to be doing a lot of honest reflection and work on my end to keep it open. But when it's open, it's like the best therapy and the most beautiful experience for myself when those things come through.
And that's why we call you the honest elf, right there. You have no choice, or else
I
you
don't have a
write.
choice. And we're not all perfect. The honest elf is a fun title because you want to assume this like snooty, I'm always honest thing. And it's difficult to live an incredibly honest life, but there comes a point where you gotta keep an integrity with yourself in certain ways, or it shows up in certain ways. And unfortunately, that's like you said, we just talked about that for me is like the one gift that I came here to deliver, and I'm screwing it up if I'm out of integrity with it.
Yeah. Well, plus like you're saying, it's a gift to you. And I know that we've talked about this before, and I see it as such a pattern where, you know, people will get to a certain point in their books or in their manuscripts or writing an article even, where there's like something that they don't want to see, and they intuitively know that their hand is going to give them an answer that they don't want to see. Like, and
Yep.
so it's, you know, I have this headache, I can't get to it, I'm so busy. And in reality, once they get to it, it takes very little time, but it's more about the revelation that is trying to come through. So that makes sense, that if you're in a situation where you really don't want to see the situation for what it is, that you would kind of like not have access to that part, or be blocking it somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I was just talking to my dance partner about the other day is that showing up is more than half of the battle. Like, there will be times when I do not feel like going to practice. I do not feel like training. I do not feel in my body. And if you just show up, like, you will leave there a better dancer, person, writer than you came there as, you know, no matter how crappy your attitude is. It's just like, you got to show up and do that. And I know a lot of times when I'm struggling at a certain point in my manuscript, or I'm struggling to write my bio, you know, and I'd sit down and I would just complain and complain and complain to you. And you're like, yeah, you just gotta write it. Like, you just gotta put your pen to the paper and you'll stop bitching, I promise. Like, it'll come out. So
It's true.
yeah, it's totally true.
That bio thing is for real. Like, we're gonna do something. I think we need to do it before the end of the year for people with their bios, because I was just coaching my husband working on his bio, and he's like, yeah, I think I'm gonna revisit it today and make sure. I was like, stop it with the bio. And he's like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? I'm like, it is never ending. You could make that thing
No.
better over and over.
Even after, yeah, and then even after it's done and said, I think that was probably the part I was most nervous about in this interview, was hearing you read my bio, because it's a constant battle with your self-image, right? When you're writing those things out, and every time you say one title, I'm like, yep, I did that, right? I did that. Okay, I did that. Like, I have to remind myself to not be intimidated by those titles if I've already sort of achieved them, accomplished them. But you know, when you're in constant go and achieve mode doing those things, it just never feels like enough. Or people, you know, call you an author or a best-selling author or a philanthropist, and I'm like, gulp. It comes with this, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it happens all along the continuum. You have this, like, you know, I've done all of this by 25, and I'm sure that this is how I have felt in a similar position, is kind of like, it's kind of like I've raised the bar to a point that I feel like I don't know if I can live up to that right now, even though it's already on paper, it's done. But like, what does that mean for the next thing? Like, I can't do that for the rest of my life. I got to keep pushing. It just has this like never ending raising the bar feeling. And then I see the reverse, where I have people who could write, you know, thousands of pages of life experience that they've learned, and yet they get hung up on the credibility factor because they don't have a degree in this, or they don't have the certificate, you know what I mean? And it's like, I know, but you've been doing this for like 30 years and you're masterful at, and yet it's like we all kind of get attached to this one part of that identity, self-image piece, and it will keep us going back and fixing the freaking bio. Like, it's, you know, how many times?
Yeah,
I don't know
even
what you're talking about.
Yeah, or even just not even like raising the own bar for yourself, but sort of upholding those titles. Like, I've had a friend be like, oh yeah, this is Alyssa and she's an author, and I like had to yeah, you know, because in my head I'm thinking, well, that was 5 years ago, and well, when I look at that book, it's not my best work, and I was young when I did that. And so I come up with all these like you know, sort of justifications for disassociating with that identity, when instead of just acknowledging like, yeah, okay, I have a book out there. I am an author. I did do it, So it's a constant adjustment along the way.
You didn't just do it, you killed it, and you weren't even 21 yet. So let's talk about that. What was the inspiration for that first book?
Oh gosh. Well, you already know this story, but it's a good one. Listeners will enjoy it. So, as we said, I'd sort of always been a writer at heart and in school, but I never really had a vision or a desire to write a book. And Amanda and I were at this really awesome summer camp for adults and entrepreneurs and authors and all these really just great, genuine souls. And I was not exactly in the best place in my life. I was in my first year of college at the time and had begun sort of parting with the religion I was raised in. I was taking a collection of courses that were really challenging and really fascinating, and I was just falling in love with my studies. But they made me really question everything that at that point I had thought that I'd known to be true. And on top of that, I was watching a lot of hypocrisy come to the surface in some of my spiritual mentors, and my father's health had started declining, and my sister had miscarried, and I had a childhood friend take a pretty sharp exit out of my life. So I had all these things going on when Amanda invited me to this event called the Good Life Project. And, she had obviously been one of the people supporting me along the way, my confidant. So she saw everything that I was going through. But, we're at this event with all these incredible people, and I was feeling quite out of place. I was probably one of, if not the youngest person there. And I just felt like my life was unraveling in front of me. I didn't have any answers, didn't have anything to give. And at one point, Amanda and I are at a picnic table with this really sweet woman, Deborah. And as Amanda introduced me, she said, this is my little sister, Alyssa, and she's writing a book. And I just picked my jaw, kicked her under the table, and tried to continue this conversation with this woman who now thought I was writing a book. So that was kind of the first seed that was planted. And despite my obvious panic about it, she continued to introduce me that way the entire week. But it gave way to a lot of conversations throughout that week between us about what message I had to give to the world, especially while I was feeling like such a huge mess.
Yeah. Well, two things about that. One is, I know that we had to have had a conversation, because I don't know why I would just pull, she's writing a book out of thin air. I
really just don't think we did.
I think that we had talked about your poetry like on the way to camp or something, had kind of gotten this conversation going. And so that would have been my nudge, because it's not like me to put a whole new thing on people. It's more like
totally entirely false. It is absolutely like you.
It's not true. I don't say it until people like start to go there, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I can totally see that for you, and then I'm part of like pushing that thing forward.
Take another step, Erin. Take another step, Erin.
Look at Teddy. Teddy's like,
yeah, you just can't bullshit the people who are on here.
Okay, well, then I'm gonna say
you cannot
this.
gaslight us. Right now.
It's a channel then, because I must know things before you tell me them. I don't honestly. I can't believe I would have done that. Okay, but the second part of my thought about that story is, as you were telling it, this is the first time I've heard you tell that story. I've heard you tell it many times, where I realized that I did the same thing to you that Alyssa did to me. Yeah. It was the same, like that. And I was I was 27 when this happened, but it was the same moment of like, yeah, try to look at one part of my life and find anything good. And then someone tells you, you should write a book. And you're like, oh my God, like, I know this all looks good out here, but behind the scenes, this is an absolute nightmare. Like, what do I have to tell anybody? So that's funny. See, it had to have been just a matrix moment.
Yeah, it's a, we joke about what BS it is, but it's a gift that you have to see that in other people, the gifts that they have to bring to the world. And you know, for whatever reason, and the just mountain of mess that I felt like I was in, you saw a connection between all of the dots. And you just encouraged me to explore it by doing that, because writing a book didn't mean writing a book and publishing and hitting bestseller. Writing a book meant you have something to give. You have a message that will support other people. And you know, you can share it without feeling like a fraud, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
grateful for it.
She says,
As-
while biting
Let
her
me just
lip.
disclaimer, as crippling as it might have felt at that picnic table, I'm grateful for it, because that wasn't the like last time that you had ever done that. I almost said to me, but for me, you know.
Well, and you also had a choice to write the book or not.
Yeah.
She didn't force you to do it.
It's true. And I will say that by the end of that week, with a little bit of nudging, Alyssa stood up on stage and wasn't that the first year that you were there? You did the
I think it
special
was.
performance and you did the slam poetry. She shared one of her poems on stage during the talent show. And like the entire room was just like, what am I looking at right now? What am I hearing? Because it was so powerful. And she said she was nervous, but she didn't look like it. She just like stepped in, owned the stage. It was this, you know, huge thing. And then at the end, she told people that there would be a compilation of poems by the time she arrived at camp the next year. And I was like, okay, so she went from I don't have anything to like delivering it. And I think camp is only 3 days long. Okay, this isn't like a week-long camp, it's like 3 days. So in 3 days, she had she'd really stepped in and owned this, like this. I think once we started talking about the poetry, it was at that point where you're like, you know what? It probably had something to do with that. This is medicine for me, and maybe it'll be medicine for other people. Like the words were, you know, doing that for you. So why would you withhold that from?
Yeah, that's so funny that you say that, because it's either like some sort of emotional suppression that I don't remember. I don't like directly recall that it happened in that sequence, or it's, you know, I stepped into the self-image for a moment and then, you know, came out later. But yes, by the end of that week, I decided, and I had told you, okay, I'll do this. And because that community was just so awesome and so supportive, and I got that type of feedback where I felt like, okay, maybe others might need this. And I do remember a few people coming up to me after that show. I don't know what the heck convinced me to get on stage to begin with, now that we talk about it, because that is terrifying. And that room was like at least 400 to 500 people. And I had never really I think I'd only performed slam poetry once or twice before for like a very small little auditorium at my high school. So I think it was the feedback I got from people. I remember one woman coming up to me very emotional after, and that whole poem that I delivered that time was about coming back to love after feeling like you're not worth it. And she came up to me very emotional, just saying how much she needed that and how timely that was for her, and thanked me for it. And that was a huge turning point of, yeah, maybe this isn't just medicine for me. Maybe it's, you know, maybe I can share it with other people and it can heal them or help them where they're at too. So I think that was what drove me to looking at you and saying, okay, we're gonna do this. I don't know what drove me to say we're gonna do it in a year, but
yeah, I was about to say, not only did you go from 0 to 100 in 3 days, you also set a deadline for yourself in doing it, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Next
yeah,
year, a goal.
deadlines definitely help me get things
Stop
done,
procrastinating.
and then telling
I
other people.
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
telling other people my deadlines.
Then
are
you're
like, okay.
accountable.
You were setting that intention, you know?
Yeah. We did it. So that was fun. That was a fun one.
So as it often happens, excuse me, as it often happens, you know, we go from like this hot mess to realizing that we have something and kind of stepping into a very expanded version of ourselves. Like, it, you know, we joke sometimes about like stepping into our future self. We have this moment where we kind of time travel and like, you know, do something that is completely outside of not just the comfort zone, but like any sort of believability at all. We do it and then we get the experience. And so we know we can, but then, you know, we go back to our lives where we are dealing with messes, right? And so it creates this incredible tension between who we know we really are and what we're really here to do, and the current reality of you know, messes going on in our lives, but also like, well, I've never written a book before and I don't know how. And so now you're not just like outside of you know, what you were thinking before, you're completely outside of a space of mastery for most people. Fortunately for you, you were like, poems are already written. And
I was gonna say that was a huge part of getting it done in a year. You know, we added a running narrative throughout it. But for the most part, the poems were written. It was just a matter of you and I sitting on the floor in your office and taking sticky notes to map out, you know, the journey of the poems and put the chronology together so we could see what was happening. But
Yeah.
fortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
So what were you were saying?
Well, just, I mean, what was that process like for you? Because you know, the narrative, we wrestled a little bit about the narrative. We wrestled even after the book was published about the narrative. So let's talk about that a little bit, because that's really connected to one of those messes that you were experiencing. And I think it's important for people to understand, like, these are the real things that are the stories behind the stories are the real things that keep us from actually finishing the project. And if you didn't have a big sister or a coach, you know, who could sit with you in that, what might have happened with that project?
That's such a good question. Yeah, I did go back to the messes that were going on in my life. And I think the underlying mess that affected all the other messes was the spiritual disconnection, which the book ended up being completely about, a journey back to love. But because I was so disconnected at the time and I felt like the pillars that were holding my world up just kind of collapsed, I didn't have a set of coping mechanisms because of that spiritual disconnection. I didn't have a set of coping mechanisms to deal with all the other disconnections that were happening in my life. And so as we were diving into building the outline for the book and doing the writing was really my saving grace in there. And like we've talked about, because that's sort of a channel, when I got quiet and I just listened to the writing and I sort of moved my head out of the way, right? Because my head was arguing with so much of that disconnection. Like I should say the connection. Like my head was arguing so much with it. So when I just kind of was able to put my head aside and let my heart kind of write it out and listen to my writing, and then having you along the way to validate that, I think that's what really helped stay on course with the book, because I managed throughout that process to get a little more grounded, you know, and do the spiritual work that got me more grounded in my life and with the message along the way. But it was really like the writing was leading me, because this wasn't like, I know the answers to this, I know how this is going to go, you know. And so I really had to surrender to the writing, to what was coming out of me, and listen to it, because and like you said, you know, even after the book was published, I would get disconnected again. I'd go back and be like, I'm not really happy that this book's on the market. I want to change the message. I just want to copy and paste and do this and change these words. And you were like, let it be, because as it came out, you know, like just trust. I think that's a constant battle that I deal with myself, even years later in different projects, is that deeper self trust, you know. And for me, it always comes back to listening to the writing, listening to what's coming out, because often, you know, I will doubt myself, or I'll second guess something, and I open up my notebook and I see the poem that came through, and I'm like, I can't doubt that, you know. It may be not this award-winning poem that just is, you know, a phenomenon across the world, but this is so precious and it has the answer right here, and I can't doubt it. So yeah.
Yeah, and it was really amazing too as we were mapping that out, because I think one of the things, and I'm sure I don't know if people get tired of hearing this, but I feel like it can't be said enough, is that usually when, you know, people ask about our story, it's couched in something, right? So like, wow, how did you get here? And then it's the story of overcoming, or how did you get here? And then it's the tragic story. But rarely do we actually look at our entire narrative with all of the tragedy and grace.
Mhm.
And so the biggest, you know, blessing of my work is that I get to see that with people as they're writing, and try to help them to see and hold all of it at the same time. Yes, tragedies, but look at all of these moments of grace. And so for you, as we were looking at all the poetry, you know, and it was like even written out chronologically, it was, here you were struggling with, like, is there God? How do I relate, if not the way that I did in my childhood, all these things. And yet you had this map, this body of work that demonstrated that there was some force moving you from this poem to that poem, from this phase to that phase. And you know, I think it's just incredible that you had the courage to really be able to look back and look for that, even when you were in staring, you know, all of your big doubts in the face over, you know, what does this all really mean? And what do I actually believe in?
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you for that. I mean, I guess we often kind of fail to look back and see the moments of courage, because for me it was just it is what it is, and you got to face it for what it is, as, you know, like, this is what's happening. This is, just listen and go. Just listen and keep going. And so yeah, and I think it's funny when you step back, because that whole A Journey Back to Love, and figuring out what had happened in the chronology of all of those poems over that 7-8 year period was learning the cycle, was realizing the cycle, and that it's not a beginning and a destination. And it's no you know, it's no coincidence that right after that book was published, my world fell apart, even in an even more cataclysmic way, and I was thrown right back into another cycle of it. So it doesn't really end. So fortunately, and again, you were a huge help during that time, to remind me that, like, hey, you've already been through this journey. Have faith that, like, it be encouraged that you'll make your way back around again. Might not happen right now, but you know, you've been through this. You had the tools. You even wrote down and published your message, and be reminded. And I think as we step back and we talk about letting the writing lead us and getting answers before we need them, that was one of them. Because here I thought that this hard year that I was in, with my dad's health declining, and, you know, dealing with all of the other personal stuff that was happening in my spiritual crisis, I thought this was just like the worst year ever, the worst thing that could ever happen. And like, things had finally gotten better, and I launched a business and I published the book, and everything's dandy, and then tragedy strikes again, you
Well,
know?
the universe was just giving you your next book, you know?
That
Like,
too. Yeah, that too, but also comfort in an answer ahead of time, a reassurance ahead of time. Hey, this is a cycle, this is a season, and life is full of them, and you're entering another. So it's hard to swallow at the time, and I don't even know if I realized this at the time because I was so deep in that tragedy. But
Yeah.
lessons.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that because you, first of all, one lesson that we learned real hard with your bestseller campaign is do not launch a best-selling book the day after an extremely polarized
So fun.
political election, like presidential election. It was like, I mean,
2016. Yep.
it messed up our travel plans. We got in at like 5 or 6 in the
Oh.
morning because of all the stuff going on in our city after that. Like, it was utter insanity. And so, but you still made it. And I think I know that a huge part of that was because you've done such an amazing job at staying close to the people who are supporting you through having them be readers and staying connected with them, on social media and through email and all the different ways that you were kind of bringing them along this exciting and slightly terrifying journey as you were going. Plus you did get up at camp and do another poem and invite everyone to sign up to help. So that helped us, like hundreds of people rallying. So you get the book launched, and that was the beginning of November 9th or 10th, right? 2016. And then you turned 21 in December.
Yeah.
And then tragedy strikes. Share a little bit, as much as you're.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was fun. That was the completion, that time period was a completion of certain chapters and the start of other ones. So that same month that we launched the book, I actually had left the firm I was working for and went on my own and started my business too. And I was also just concluding my time at junior college, getting my general education done. And I was pretty burned out after everything. Around the time my 21st birthday came, I was just like, whew, I need a break. I love school. I don't want to make myself hate it. I'm about to transfer to university. I think I'm going to take a year off. And that was an interesting decision to be made. Oh my God. I think I made that with the other sister who's not on this call, but Sierra. I was at her house at like 3 a.m. writing an essay, and I was just so tired and done. This was like after the book launch and after the business, and I was trying to like get my feet into working with clients and a whole different world. And I remember looking at her and I was like, I think I'm going to take a year off school. Like, what if I did? And she was like, what if you don't make decisions at 3 a.m. while you're super exhausted and trying to finish a term paper? And
Sister.
I ended up going home and talking to my dad about it. And I was super nervous for that because, breaks from academics were not things that were encouraged in our family at the time. And he just very reassuringly looked at me and patted my knee and said, kid, I'll let you know when I'm worried. Like, go do what you need to do. And so I had decided at that point to take a year off, which was timely because that January he ended up passing unexpectedly. And so that was my first experience with death, period. And at that point, I hadn't really established those old any coping mechanisms that we had sort of discussed, unraveled earlier in the prior year. And so I had no idea what had just happened to my world because my dad was my everything and we were very close. And when his health had declined, I sort of tapered back on working full time, and I started taking care of him and was home with him a lot. And I, you know, my entire life, he was my best friend and my confidant. And so I had no idea how to process death, you know, 20 years old. And no one in our family had passed who was close to us. And so I was grieving pretty hard, spiraling pretty hard for months. And then you gave me a book called The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And I just rolled my eyes at the thought of, you know, this former Olympic gymnast having anything of worth to say to me that would reach me at the place I was at in my journey. And I ended up finishing that book in like 3 days and signed up 2 days later for his retreat in the following August. And which was a huge deal because it was my first time going out of country alone. You know, and it was in Costa Rica. And so I ended up going there and
you were
not really-
grieving, and you were grieving, and
know.
your entire family was like, wait a minute.
And so stressed out, and like 100 pounds of a tiny little girl that probably shouldn't be traveling on her own. And it was not good news. But for some reason, I was just like, I have to go there. I had gone through all of the stages in grief, and I knew that acceptance was like just choking me. I couldn't do it. It was right there, you know, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't figure it out. And I was like, I don't know what's in Costa Rica, but I just know this is my next step, and I know I gotta go. And my mom, my poor mother, just did everything she could to support me and not freak the heck out when I went. But yeah, so I went down there for a week, and I had a totally unexpected week of just synchronistic experiences across the board that were extremely transformative collectively. And I remember coming back and telling you, I could write a whole book on the week I just had. You don't even understand. And it was almost everything that happened there was so magical and transformative. I don't think I shared it with anyone but you for months, for well over 6 months. Yeah, at least, because no one could understand. In my head at the time, I was like, no one could even fathom all the things that just happened. Like, that's how much it really just took a bomb to my reality in a lot of really great and awesome ways that I didn't even really understand. And so that was the start of that.
Yeah. So if you had to choose just one of the things that happened for you in Costa Rica, because, you know, I mean, the long and short of it is now you're finishing up a novel that takes people on a fictionalized experience of that week. But what was one of those moments for you that really was part of the acceptance process? Because I know that, you know, this really was about finishing the processing of the grief and getting ready for the next season.
Oh gosh, part of me I'm wondering how much to share or how much I remember asking the author who I went there to see, Dan Millman. I remember asking him a similar question about his coming book, and him saying, you're just going to have to wait until it comes out. You got it. Yeah, it's actually hard as I think about that question, because I have fictionalized and added so much magic to the experiences that happen. It's hard for me to pull one out. I think I would really sum it up to the synchronistic connections that happen there with strangers. You know, like, this was Dan Millman's retreat, but there were, I think, 15 to 20 other people who had come there, complete strangers, and I was in total shutdown mode, not wanting to connect at all. And when I opened up and I connected to those people, the ways that they fed me and vice versa, the things that I had to say that I had no freaking clue or answers, or I'm just grieving. And, you know, but then you open your mouth and you realize that whatever you're going through resonates with someone else in some sort of way. And so all of those tiny connections that happen along the way were really what built the magic of the experience. So
yeah, and there were some just I mean, I went there. You went there in 2017?
Yeah,
Okay, so
2017.
I was at that same resort in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we figured that out after you came back, like that we were in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some things in this book, like, first of all, the young man who shows up with coffee all the time. Like, when I think about my week in Costa Rica, it's a large part of it. And I was doing some serious transformational work. A large part of it was the coffee, because it's like otherworldly. It really is. And I knew the exact guy that you were talking about, because I remember having the same feeling about him of like, oh my God, how does he know? Like, he knew people.
And I think I kind of want to marry you now that you're bringing me this amazing coffee every 10 minutes.
And so I remember reading the first draft of your manuscript and being like, oh my God, I know him, because she hadn't told me about him in our discussions. We were talking about like the death meditation and the zip lining and like all these big things, but these little things were like, oh my gosh, I totally know who that guy was. And oh my God, he was the sweetest. And oh my God, you danced with him. Like, so like, there's an amazing connection, romance thing that happened, that happens in this novel, that is part of what helps you to come back to life. But I think there's this, the I don't know how many times I've read this manuscript yet already, but
A few more to go.
I don't, and I know Teddy's read it. Isn't the zip lining piece like one of the ones that just, I don't know if it's the way that it's written or it's the sensory that you put in there, but it is like, it's like watching someone come back to life, really. And it doesn't matter if you've never ziplined before, you know that feeling, you know that being pushed to do something that you're like, oh, I'm not doing that. And then, being pushed a little bit more every time. And the person, like, we've all had the person who's catching us because we're scared. And then the person who's like, okay, I'm catching you. And now I think you're insane because now you're doing it crazy. Like, what? Right?
Oh, it's so funny to hear it from that perspective. Yeah. And you realize it's not even about the zip lining at all once you're going through it. It's really great for me to hear that was a huge part of the magic for you in reading through, because every time I have to go through and read the manuscript, I'm like this over that. It's like the same thing with that I talked about with my poetry, where it's medicine for me. Reading through that part for me is like, ooh, that was not me writing through that entire second. Whoever you are, can you just write the rest of the book too? Because that one was just like total magic. Yeah.
It is. It's such a powerful metaphor. Like, anyone who's been through a death and rebirth experience to any degree, like, to me, that was the pivot point for the character in your book. And
yeah, and when you break it down, you see a lot of those parts of it, like she doesn't want to, she's like terrified of it and doesn't want to, and is like, what are you talking about? I'm not going ziplining. And then when she just moves forward, when she just takes a step and the path appears before her and she keeps stepping, and then it's like a part of her is just drawn to it, and she sort of gets herself out of the way, and this part that knows the journey forward opens up and goes forth. And yeah, it's really funny what you said about the supporting character who keeps catching her along the way and is like, I'll help you. Okay, have you lost your freaking mind? At this point.
It's true. I mean, we have those, like, ziplining or not, we have those people who show up, and then we go further, right? We go further than we thought we would. We go further than even they thought we would. And oftentimes they're the ones who we are borrowing faith from. They're the ones that we're borrowing courage and faith and belief from to even do it in the first place. And then we blow their minds, and then it's like, now what?
And what I love about the end of that scene, because it kind of wrote itself. So I feel like when I talk about this book, I do it from a stance of, it feels like someone else wrote the book and I'm like, oh, I really like this part and I don't really like this part. So the end, the way that scene ended up was her walking off because she decided to go first at the beginning and was like, no, I'm going first because if I watch everyone else do it, I'm just going to be even more terrified, which is a very real personality trait of mine that was reflected in there. So by the end, she's walking off and looks back and sees everyone copying the things that she ended up doing, like going upside down and going backwards and spinning. And it was this almost like emergence of a leader at the end of a terrifying experience. And that wasn't the intention, that wasn't, but that was the reality of it, because when she looked back, everyone was copying her. And of course, that's like the biggest compliment there is out there. And so that's what I loved about that scene.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's a whole hero's journey in a few minutes of a scene. It's incredible. And it's a hero's journey that, like you said, it mirrors, what are you talking about? I'm not going to write a book 3 days later, taking a stage, blowing everyone's mind with slam poetry, and then them being like, okay, so when you launch that book, we want to help. So can we get on a list or something? It's like, it definitely is part of your pattern, your story matrix.
Me looking at my older sister. Go ahead, Teddy.
That's what was happening at the end, right? At the end of the zip lining was slam poetry.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, good.
That was
I'm
amazing.
so glad.
I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'm so glad. I almost feel like I should clarify for listeners, because we've all kind of read the manuscript and know the gist of the trajectory of this project. But essentially, this first book that I'm just at the finish line of completing is going to be the first installation of a whole fiction novel series that I'm working on called the Lionheart Chronicles. So this first book has taken about 3 years to complete. Gulp. But huge respect now for an understanding of what fiction authors go through with writing these things. But essentially, this series follows a young woman named Scarlett Lanelli, a second generation immigrant from Italy, through her journeys around the world as she experiences life's tragedies and learns the laws of the universe to alchemize them into something greater. So every book is based in a different country, highlighting the traditions and mythology of their culture while showing the sort of sacred synchronicities that connect us all and lead us all and bring us back to our own truth. So I'm excited for it. I have the next like 3 books lined, like sort of outlined what's going to happen. But obviously a lot of these are going to be very experience based. So I'm very open to, where they take me.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's another important piece for people to hear is like, because, you went from taking a bunch of poems and putting it into an order and then developing a narrative that would thread all of them together, all the way to now writing an entire novel that has the essentials of your experience, but then has been kind of amped up. So what has that process been like for you? You said it's 3 years. Gulp. Like, what's the gulp about? What are some of the really awesome parts of this process and some of the really challenging aspects?
Well, the gulp is about the first book got done in a year. And this one, 3 to 4 years. And granted, I started this. So when I got back from that year off, which after the Costa Rica experience, I ended up traveling a lot that year. And I got back and I went to UCSD. And so working on this project, I had the inspiration for it. But it was not something I could do while I was in school. So I was doing it on breaks. I was on the quarter system, go to school for 10 weeks, take a break, and then just like churn a lot of writing out, take a break, go back to school, take a break. So that's kind of the reason it took so long, because I did that for 2 years. And then, it learning how to write fiction is, and I always said I couldn't do it because of this reason. Like, it's a totally different realm compared to writing poetry. And there's some truth to that statement now. But some of it's also just intimidation that you feel along the way in doing it. But it's been a lot of learning along the way. And I think something specific to this project, because it's so heavily based on my experience, was the first round, with your encouragement, because I was like, I'm going to write a novel and it's going to be fiction and I'm going to change this, this, and this and keep this. And you were like, just write it out the way that it happened first, like, I don't think, and this might not be the case with all writers, but I don't think that we always realize that, like, the writing is therapy for us too. Like we've talked about, it's the answers for us too. And so I was trying to like jump the gun and get to the end stages at the beginning. And I had to write the whole book, how it happened for me first. And then and find the therapy and go through all the tears of that, and the magic of like soaking it in. This is my story, how it happened. And then by the end, okay, now I have the control and the ability to go back and make it fiction, make it a novel. So that's been a hefty process with a whole lot of revisions.
Before you keep going, I want to make sure that people understand, like, that writing it raw is something that I always ask people to do, even if we have to fictionalize some things because we don't want to put this person's business out, or we don't want to do this. Like, it is so important because we trap energy and trauma and pain in our bodies. So moving it out specifically through writing is one way to like get it out and discharge it. It's also another way for us to show ourselves things that we didn't see through that process. And for you, one of the reasons why I thought that it was even more important for you to do this was because you had this particular thing that happened when you got back from Costa Rica, where you were like, you would kind of like grabbed onto all of your magic and power, and like it was this super empowering thing. And then within a few months, you were in a relationship that wasn't healthy for you, that was like draining you of all of that power. And so when you were returning to the writing, you were returning to that. And for me, I was like, go back through the arc, right? Like you were kind of in that space again of dealing with a death of sorts. Like you were at the end of another grieving process. And so for me, thinking it through, I was like, I really think that if you go back through it raw and write it, you're really going to be able to heal, not just from the initial story of dealing with dad's passing, but the story that you had just emerged from with the ex.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify that, because it is, like you're saying, it's a cycle, it's patterns, and so revisiting, how often do we say, like, we write the book that we have to read, and sometimes we have to read it over and over and over again, because we're continuing to go through the cycles and needing to remember.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that highlights another reason why it's so important to have maybe like an accountability buddy, but just a coach, someone who's on the outside who can see those things and make sure you don't skip over any parts of the process that might be important to your own healing, and not just the story that you're writing, because at the end of the day, you matter. It's not just the writing that's getting down that matters. And had you not been there along the way to remind me not to ignore those things, it would have made this book take maybe 10 years instead of 3 years, because I'd skipped over so much of the stuff that I would have really needed to work through. But yeah,
super important piece, because every time we're in that process, we're in another phase of that that big arc and revisiting it is really, really key. So
Yeah.
what are some other kind of sticky points for this particular project that you've experienced?
I feel like
This-
because you know her story, you're the lawyer knowing all the answers to your questions right
Yeah,
now.
I feel
You're
like
trying
these are
to
really loaded questions,
Yeah,
and
she's
I
trying
feel
to
like you should
elicit-
answer that.
No, I really just want your answer.
Well,
You know, the one about,
No, not that
no,
at
I'm
all.
kidding you. I'm kidding you, Miss Amanda.
well, I have a really sort of magical moment that came to mind. I think we hit the sticky ones. Do you recall any other sticky ones that along the
No,
way?
I just want to know what came up for you around the stickiness.
Okay, well, definitely timeline. Obviously getting my first book done in a year put some pressure on, wow, this freaking novel has taken me 3 years. And, I'm a very task-oriented person. I like checking things off of a list. And so I've had to come to grips with the fact that, fiction and novels just don't really work that way always. And I've been fortunate to not experience so much writer's block. It's more so all of the turnovers that have had to happen with the manuscript to take it from being my story into creating no, this is Scarlett's journey, and and then adding all of the fiction and magic to it along the way, while also doing the research, highlighting Costa Rica, why don't we talk about that sticky moment? How did I forget that one? That's what you were trying to get at, right? Okay, yeah.
I mean, if there was a sticky moment there.
So it's been really awesome going through the True to Intention cohort and working with this small group of people and having their encouragement and support and eyes and reflection along the way. And I realized through all of the retreats and the programs that we've done as I've been working through this manuscript that I realized the life that was possible for me if I really wanted to head in this direction. Because as I said before, even after I published the first book, my intention was not to create a career being an author or to write more books. I always figured I would go get my degree and build a career off of that degree. And what I was doing on the side with my business was it was just something to get me through school and something that I enjoyed and was flexible. And I didn't expect it to quite be something more. But through your programs, I got really clear on a life that I could create doing this stuff. And that included really using this series to as something I could really enjoy writing and doing for the rest of my life and making a living doing it. And as I brainstormed what that would look like, it was, going to the countries and going to the places that I was going to be writing about to do research and living there and living with the people and the culture and the traditions. And so the first book is obviously based in Costa Rica. And so my intention was to go back to Costa Rica and stay there for a few months and live there and do all of the research I needed to come back. And so that was a really fun and unexpected experience. But I got all the research I needed and I came back and the book is going to be better for it.
Okay, so there's like a whole world of information that you left out.
Yeah, because
Did any spiders make it into your book by chance?
oh God, no,
or-
that word won't be anywhere in any of the
You
books.
control F, find it in the book if it's in there. And yeah.
No, it won't be. Yeah. So, okay.
Okay.
We all want to hear that story, don't we? I don't think Teddy and Lori have heard it yet. But I'm pretty sure I group called Aaron and Amanda that night.
We
and
were in
was
the
like,
car and we
why
were
the heck did you encourage me on this career choice?
we were mid move to Arizona just nothing else to do in the car, and we're looking at each other while you're telling us.
Oh.
It's like, oh no.
Yeah, these were the sticky moments that you wanted. Yeah, because it's all part of the writing, right? So I booked this place in the middle of the jungle to do my research. I'm renting out a guest house that's part of someone else's, land, and I rented out for like 3 months and ahead of time. And my plan was to stay there and do all the writing. I'm there for like 2 weeks. Tons of critters everywhere, right? Like lizards in the house. I'm killing these giant beetles in the middle of the night that are just crawling all over the bathroom. And expected, things are expected. There's like 3-4 spiders popping up a day, and I'm like, okay, whatever. I asked for it. It's part of the experience. And then I was planning to just go visit a different part down south of Costa Rica, and I took out my suitcase and I put it on the couch, which at that point, 2 weeks staying there, I hadn't really sat on the couch very much. And I came back about an hour later, and it turned out and a spider egg sac was inside the crevice of the couch between the back seat and it had hatched. And hundreds of baby spiders were just swarming my suitcase and my clean clothes and the couch. And this is a tiny apartment, and I just kind of like to take deep breaths and figure out how to deal with this, because it's the middle of the night in the middle of the jungle and it's dark, and I'm not going outside. I'm not going to open my door because things come inside when you open the door at night and the lights are on, and I didn't know what to do. So I ended up grabbing every piece of clothing, and for whatever reason, I thought that this was best. I'm not even going to try to justify it right now. I squatted every piece of clothing against the back of the couch to get the spiders off and put it in a new suitcase. And that, wasn't the most brilliant solution, because then spiders ended up in the kitchen and the bed and the sheets and everywhere. And so after I got every piece of clothing clean, I sprayed like half a bottle at least of just insect spray all over, and ended up freaking suffocating myself in my apartment. Yes, Teddy, you look horrified right now. It was that bad. Yeah. And so by the end of the night, I can barely breathe, and I'm in the shower pulling freaking baby spider legs out of my hair, and it was awful and quite traumatizing. I didn't sleep for the next few nights. I remember sitting on the bed trying to do work at night, and in my peripheral, I'd see spiders swarming my sheets that weren't there, and I'm sitting there like spreading out the sheets, and oh my God, my brain is so traumatized. So long story short, I was done there at that place after that, and a sort of collection of other experiences that happened there. And I was like, screw it, I'm gonna go travel for the rest of my time here. So I was staying in Uvita in Costa Rica, and I ended up going down south to Golfito, and then up the entire Pacific side over through San Jose and down the Caribbean. And so it was completely not what was planned for my time there. It was not I had the intention to I'm going there to finish the manuscript and get all the writing done. And traveling's awesome, but that traveling experience specifically did not grant me the type of creative headspace that I wanted to be able to write. So I tried to channel it in other ways. I did a lot of tours. I was fortunate to just meet some really awesome people who ended up being great resources for the research. And, I went to the Corcovado, the National Wildlife Park, and Irazu, the volcano. And so it turned out to be a really great experience, and I got a lot of research, and I ended up coming home. So yeah, it was sticky and totally not what was expected, but part of the journey. I got all the magic the first time I went.
I can imagine that being one of the nightmares that you have.
Oh, I had nightmares for weeks after. I woke
in
up
one of the books, so yeah. wanted to think of.
Oh yeah. No, I just have too much pride to put the word spider in my book after what I went through. You know, I just actually I got back recently and I went to stay at my sister's house, my other sister's house, and she like laid out a bed for me on the floor. And somehow throughout the night, her and her husband ended up laying on that, and I was sitting on the couch, and she's on her phone, and a spider is coming down from the ceiling, and it comes down in front of her screen, and she just freaks out, like loses her crap, freaks out, jumps on the coffee table, and is standing there screaming at her husband, who's trying to find what she's seeing. And the spider's like crawling up to, you know, further to the ceiling, and I'm sitting there like unable to help it all because I'm laughing hysterically because of everything I just went through. Like at least it's a distance from me, so I'm not, you know, losing my mind. But you know, everything has symbolism, right? And she's sort of the metaphor freak in the family. So she's sitting there like, Alyssa, I don't know what shit you still have to work out, but go do it outside of my house before you ever come back here. So yeah, that was a good one. Lots of sticky fun moments full of trap doors there.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think that was about? Like, I mean, you got a lot of
You are
information that you
brave.
needed. I'm brave. I am. But
You're
see, this
brave.
is like you're I
Okay.
mean, look, you're special. And you're not the only one who has gone to do primary research and had the stuff hit the fan. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
this is part of the creative process. And for you as spiders, and for other people, it's, you know, missed flights and this and that. But it always seems to have some sort of connection back to the project. And so have you sorted through that yet? Have you figured out what that might have been?
I have
about?
not, you know, I'm still working through the nightmares with my therapist. So
All right.
no, honestly,
Episode 2.
I haven't gotten to the like I'm still so frustrated about the spider specifically the spider experience that I'm not I haven't done any deep analysis into that. But I would say that the lesson I took from it, you know, especially like the expectations that I had around the timeline and around the type of work that I was really going to get done while I was there, and I was going to come back and have a synopsis written, have it all ready for production and ready for editors, and we were going to have readers' eyes on it by a certain time. And I had to let that go. And I had to make peace with, you know, it's going to come out in its right timing. And it's going to have all of the right things in it at the right time. So that was a huge part of it for me. But, you know, if you have, it really looks by your smile like you have an idea about what the spider experience was about that I don't.
I really hope that the spiders get into the book somehow. I do, because I don't think it makes sense to have an experience in the deep, deep jungle that Scarlet is having without something like this. Plus, you have Scarlet is like dealing with the two kind of experiences that she has are high anxiety and heavy, like achy depression, right? Like these are her two switches that she's got when she enters Costa Rica. And so for me, like spiders would be like the perfect something or other to be part of a scene that spikes the anxiety,
You
for her to
know,
have to use her new tools. I'm just saying.
this sounds like a really great place to bookmark for coaching later.
Okay.
But
Listen,
the
to
most
it would
I
be
have
epic.
the most that I have looked into it is that spiders are very representative of change and transformation. And I'm just not there with reconciling that in my brain yet. So we'll get there.
we'll get there.
And eventually maybe I will swallow my pride about putting that word in my book, but I highly doubt it.
I will not hold my breath. It's however it's supposed to be, it will be.
There
it
goes
will be.
Amanda stirring up the shit again.
I don't know.
We were all thinking it there.
What if,
You know,
what if there's magic in that moment?
Mhm.
Oh, there wasn't. There wasn't.
But there could be for Scarlett. Once you figure out what that is for you.
I'll tune in. I'll listen to the writing and I'll see where it leads. No, that's funny. You know, I think something else that would be really relevant to mention here, especially for other, you know, writers or aspiring authors listening who have to do the same thing that I did, was right before this, right 4 days actually before I left to Costa Rica, I had, you know, a pretty finished manuscript. My goal was to go there, get the research, build the world up a little more, and be done with it. And I had to, at that point, email Dan Millman, the author whose work and name was really heavily involved in this book, because it was his retreat that I had gone to. And I had to ask him for, request his eyes on it and his permission, you know, to relay some of these things. And he very kindly and very wisely declined my request 4 days before I left, and gave me some really awesome advice as to what direction to go in for myself for the writing. And I had to take a few deep breaths, because not only did that like break my heart, because he was such a pivotal part of my journey and I wanted to, you know, relay his teachings and his work. But it was also, I knew how much work it was going to be to write him out and to redirect the message and the story. And that was like really disheartening as I'm about to leave to do to meet the other goals that I had set for myself. And so that was how I went into it. And I knew that it was like really great advice that he had given me. And I'll probably share that advice after the books come out, just so that, you know, there's some surprise with where, you know, it went. But I knew it was going to be worth it, and it was going to be better for the story, and better for the fiction. And actually, in declining that request for permission, he really gave me permission to let him go, I think a lot of times, especially, you know, we have this wave of people going through this transformative self-development, and especially actually in Costa Rica. And a lot of what happens in doing that is we lock on to these shaman or these gurus and these mentors, and we sort of idolize them because their work and their words have been so pivotal in our own journeys. And in my wanting to honor him and his work, I was very much so putting whatever wisdom I had learned personally or ways that I had interpreted things, you know, I put it aside. And so in declining my request for permission, he really did give me permission on a different level to let myself come through the writing and let my own sort of philosophy be birthed through it. And so however that mixes in with all the chaos that happened in Costa Rica, I have no idea. Hopefully it'll become clear to me. But it has been much better for the manuscript. And I was really able to, you know, transform a lot of what the book was meant to be. And it became something else entirely. So
that's so powerful. I remember when I heard that, you mentioned it, I think in one of our meetings, you mentioned it. I felt the bottom drop out. Like I felt the bottom drop out. And I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't imagine what you were feeling, because I knew what I was feeling, and it wasn't my work and it wasn't my experience. But it was not but a little bit that the wisdom of it came through. I didn't say anything because you're deep in the middle of it. But I thought, oh my, this is, as much as this hurts,
yeah,
I think there's something really about to be birthed in this. And I think that's important for creatives to know, that sometimes our biggest disappointment or turns out to be a gift.
Yeah, I know. And Amanda was really right there trying to like, hey, it's okay. I think this is going to actually be better for you and for the book. And I was just like, nope. Uh-huh. Sure thing. Trying
Well,
to, prepare
you were
myself.
stuck in, yeah, you were stuck in like his wisdom and his words, which were all
Mhm.
powerful, but letting go of that, I thought, oh my God, the Alyssa that I know is so powerful. I'm going to cry right now. Your wisdom and what you have inside of you is going to come out of you, and it's yours.
Um,
Yeah.
Teddy, you're gonna make me cry. No, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, all writers kind of forget that. Amanda's told the stories about her authors or who have come to the retreat, and they bring tons of books of research because they want to include they just want to like make it an accumulation of other people's work so that it has credibility. And a huge part of, I think, as writers in taking that step to be transform into authors is putting our work out into the world and putting our name on it and owning that story as ours, and all of the wisdom and everything that has come through as as ours. And this was another layer of doing that. So
You mentioned earlier the trust factor. And this is another layer of that, trusting yourself, of what all you have to offer. You're incredible. And I look forward to seeing the new rewrite on it. So.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. Especially because your guys' eyes we're on the first draft, the first run around with his, but I'm really confident about the direction it's taken. Not only has it challenged me to go inward and really dive into my beliefs and my understandings and my own philosophy about the certain topics that I cover, but also it's like broken the dam for me to highlight the culture and highlight a lot of the mythology, that was birthed there. And so I'm really excited for, I was struggling so much, and I know Aaron spent so much time helping me build a world out, and this really gave way for the world to sort of come forth in this first novel. So I'm excited, and also a little like, gosh, what did I sign up for? What am I signing up for in saying I'm doing a whole series of these? Because the first one, it was like one very tiny expectation before, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a whole different type of, I hate to liken it to like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, because those are such, legacies in themselves, but the type of world that it helped me to to birth forward, it's really in exciting and intimidating. In terms of, maybe I should stop telling people that it's a series and we'll just see how the first book goes.
It's such a powerful, I would love to leave this on this note for listeners, because I think that this is like, when we get into a creative process, we're hanging on to a few things, right? Like, these are the things that I'm going to communicate, and these are the people who are going to be part of it. And we're like, we hang on to them. And, life itself has a really unbelievable way of inviting us to let go of those things, because those were just the invitation. That was just the beginning of what was trying to come forward. But it's in the writing, it's in the process of wrestling with your ideas and wrestling with like, well, I don't know if I really agree with how that person said that, or, it's in the wrestle that we get to know ourselves, understand ourselves, learn how to trust ourselves. And so like, I'm just in awe that you see that at this phase before the book is even done, that you can see how, you went in wanting to do absolutely right by Dan Millman. Like I watched how his philosophy and his grounded spirituality resuscitated you.
Mm-hmm.
But in conveying that, if you had focused only on that and he hadn't released you from that, you may have missed all the parts that you brought to that process, all of the, the socio-cultural anthropology lens, right? And all these things that now you're having to pull forward and draw on in order to complete the project that you may not have because you really wanted his work to be center stage in your experience, but his work really threaded through. So I think that's incredible. And I think it's just, if people take anything from this episode, it's that, like, noodle on that for a while and look for the ways that we do that all the time, because we do it in our projects. We do it as we're writing books. We do it as we're building programs. We do it as we're speaking on stage. We're mimicking, we're trying to deliver other people's wisdom, and how much of our own gets lost when we are just working so hard to bring that stuff forward. It's huge.
Yep. Amen to that. And I am in the middle of swallowing that pill as I rewrite it all, because it's just a matter of trusting the process, like knowing that this is going to be better for me, for the manuscript, and so I'm trusting the process and letting myself really enjoy the writing that's happening, because I'm in those moments, writing those scenes through and exploring, like you said, getting to know myself and my thoughts on these moments, and being able to do it in a fictionalized way with characters that I'm creating. Like, I'm letting myself get lost in the fantasy and the world in a whole new way. So yeah, him doing that was very pivotal to my own writing journey, because it's helping me fall in love with the work even more.
Yeah. Alyssa, where will you be in 5 years? What will your bio look like in 5 years? Who knows?
That sounds like a poem I'm scared to write.
Oh no. I thank you for telling the spider story. Thank you for, being so real and honest about what the creative process has looked like for you, because at every turn, you have been confronted with the same sort of challenges that your characters are facing in the poetry. And it's incredible to see you putting this all together, and to see kind of like this. I feel like this is like a full circle moment where, like, the first, she's making me write a book. What? While I'm like in the middle of a mess of trying to figure out what I believe anymore, I feel like that's what we're witnessing right now, is you using your writing to develop your philosophy. And in no way do I imagine that this will be over at the end of this book. It's just going to keep going because of who you are. But it's a really cool, loop. It's a really cool little echo of where it started and where you're at right now.
Yeah, I think personally where this this series, this project hits home for me, and why it feels like such a divine inspiration, is the way that I have set it up is for each book to be that for me, for each book to be a process and a cycle where I will have to dive into the philosophies that I will have to learn for myself to really, create my own perspectives around. So, it's going to be, I've set it up to be medicine for me, and for my life along the way. So I'm just relaying it and sharing it and hoping it will be medicine for others too.
I think it will. Well, our audience is probably going to want to get in touch with you. So how can they do that?
So my work and my writings can be found at lionheartcreations.org. And I can be found on all social media platforms as Alyssa Noel Cuello.
Go check it out. She's posting her poetry there all the time. And it's just make sure you got a Kleenex next to you whenever you open up her page. That's what I do. And I don't think it's just the big sister thing. So
Awesome. Thank you so much for it's really cool to be in the hotspot with my team.
yeah. It wasn't so bad, right?
It wasn't.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank our listeners for listening to this episode of Sips of Story and Sanity. If you like what you heard, please consider subscribing, leaving us a review, and maybe even sharing your own moment of realizing like, maybe I'm hanging on to this thing a little bit too hard, this thing that pulled me in. What would happen if I let go of it? Let us know how that goes. You can also find out more details about our upcoming collaborative book, You Can't Make This Story Up, What If It's All Happening For Us, at truetointention.com. So that's it for today. See y'all later.